Hi, everyone. I'm Marie Harf with the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Welcome to everyone joining on our webinar, all of our students and staff and faculty that have Georgetown affiliations, and also welcome to everyone joining on Facebook Live as well. We are streaming in a couple of locations so we can have as many people view this as possible. Before we jump into our conversation, I'm going to turn it over to do some introductions from Jack Van Scoter. He is an SFS grad, currently a graduate student at Georgetown, but also maybe more importantly for this conversation, a current Georgetown star of the track and field team. He also, I should note, in 2020, his graduating year, he was awarded SFS's Stephanie Waterman Medal for Outstanding Scholar Athlete. So with that, Jack, I'll turn it over to you to do some introductions and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Marie. I'd like to welcome everyone to Sports and Statecraft, a conversation with Paralympian Amy Mullins, SFS'98, and Dr. Victor Cha, hosted by the Walsh School of Foreign Service. My name is Jack Van Scoter, and I'm a second-year graduate student in the Liberal Studies program in the School of Continuing Studies, where I focus on the social psychology of climate change. My bachelor's degree in foreign service from the SFS informs my research into the ways that political and economic institutions can meaningfully address the humanitarian consequences of our warming planet. And as Marie pointed out, in addition to my Georgetown studies, I'm also captain of the men's track and field team, competing in long distance events like the 5K and the 10K. Today, we are honored to be joined by Paralympian Amy Mullins. Amy is the first double amputee in history to compete in Division I NCAA track and field, setting world records in the 100 meters, 200 meters, and long jump events. She represented Team USA in the 1996 Paralympic Games, and in 2012 was named chef de mission for the USA in the London Olympics and Paralympics. That year, she was also appointed to the Council to Empower Women and Girls Through Sports by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Off the track, Amy is a lauded runway and editorial fashion model, becoming a global brand ambassador for L'Oréal Paris in 2011. She's also an accomplished actress and producer, cast in mega hit shows like Netflix's Stranger Things and FX's Devs. Meanwhile, her nonprofit work and public speaking have undoubtedly inspired millions around the world. Her TED Talks have been translated into 42 different languages, where she challenges us to redefine the word disability and embrace adversity as an opportunity for education and improvement. In 2017, she was one of the youngest ever inductees into the United States National Women's Hall of Fame. I am also pleased to introduce Dr. Victor Cha. Victor Cha is Professor of Government and the D.S. Song KF Chair in the Department of Government and the School of Foreign Service. A dedicated academic, he served for a decade as the director of the SFS Asian Studies program before being appointed Vice Dean for Faculty and Graduate Affairs at SFS in July 2019. Beyond the hilltop, Dr. Cha serves as a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Previously, he served in the White House as Director for Asian Affairs at the National Security Council from 2004 to 2007, working primarily on Japan, the Korean Peninsula, Australia, New Zealand, and Pacific Island affairs. He received 2 outstanding service commendations during his NSC tenure. Dr. Cha is the author of numerous books, including Beyond the Final Score, The Politics of Sport in Asia. And today's conversation will be moderated by Marie Harf. Marie is the Executive Director of External Relations at SFS. Beforehand, she worked as the Executive Director of the Serve America Pact, advising service-oriented leaders on applying their backgrounds to politics. Previously, Harf served as Secretary of State John Kerry's Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications and as Deputy Spokesperson for the State Department. She was also head of national security and foreign policy issues for Barack Obama's presidential re-election campaign in 2012. Marie began her career in 2006 at the Central Intelligence Agency as an analyst on Middle East issues and later as its media spokesperson. And with that, I turn things over to Marie.
Great. Thank you so much, Jack. I'm so happy that you were able to be a part of this conversation. And I'm really thrilled about today's event. Amy is such an amazing SFS alum for so many reasons, which you just heard. And Victor, in addition to knowing everything about issues like North Korea's nuclear program, knows a lot about sports diplomacy as well. So we're going to have a conversation, but we also want to get all of our folks on the webinar involved. So as we talk, think about questions, put them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, not the chat, but the Q&A tab. And as we have people ask questions, you will be upgraded, for lack of a better term, to the conversation so you can ask them on camera. So we'll be able to see you and hear your question that way. So start thinking about questions. As you think of them, put them in the Q&A so we can start getting other folks involved as well. So Amy, I'm going to start with you. You know, you've had this amazing career in so many things, but also in international sports. And I know you've had some personal experience sort of navigating this line when politics comes into the Olympics, particularly. So why don't you say a few words about your own experiences with the Olympics and with confronting some of these issues that, you know, as we head into the Beijing Olympics, they start, the opening ceremony is Friday. There's a lot of other issues beyond the actual sporting events that we're talking about. So why don't you just give us some of your own personal history here?
Well, the conversation that you and I had last week, Marie, we were talking about our experiences and this topic of sports diplomacy, you know, the promise of the Olympics and the hope of the Olympic spirit has wonderful idealistic principles of uniting people, fostering conversation, fostering, you know, shared good, common values. And this is the whole premise that the IOC wants to promote, saying that sports is beyond politics. Of course, we know that when you put on a uniform that is the flag of your country, how can politics not come into it? Now, when I competed in '96, I mean, we didn't even have a US Paralympic Committee then. So you were just under the wider Olympic umbrella, and it was a very lonely experience to be a Paralympian then. I mean, now there's so many more athletes and it's so much more well organized. But at the time, you know, you're very young, you're a teenager. I mean, in my case, I was 21, and the dream is just to get there to compete. And it's a very romantic vision of competing for your country. Those feelings can change over time, just because of other pursuits, and the fact that, you know, at Georgetown, all of us do get a civics education, and we all have to do philosophy and ethics, and truthfully those debates have never left me. And so in 2008, when I was asked by the current administration at the time to go to Beijing for the opening ceremonies of the Paralympic Games as the US envoy and meet the senior officials there of the CCP, you know, the vain part of me absolutely wanted to take Air Force One. It was like, do you want to have Air Force One and go to Beijing overnight and shake some hands and see this amazing opening ceremonies and then come home? And I had many friends saying, just get on the plane. This is Air Force One. This is amazing. And something in me just it stuck. It stuck, and I didn't, you know, at the time with the war in Iraq, you know, I didn't feel like I could be the representative of the administration, or that I wanted to be there in Beijing and shake some hands and be a part of it in that way. Now, I don't know that that was right or wrong. It was just a genuine kind of crisis for me at the time, because I both wanted to do it in one spirit, and then there was something else that felt like it was disingenuous for me to do that. But this is the problem of the athletes. So many of the athletes that are there in Beijing and going to Beijing, is that the current diplomatic boycott means that a lot of athletes are put in the position by human rights organizations who want them to use their platform to speak up about the documented human rights abuses in China. And yet Rule 50 of the Olympic Charter specifically prohibits Olympic athletes from making any political statements, or even, protesting. So it's a very difficult position for athletes to be in. They've trained for their whole lives, and for many of them, this is the prize, and you have to be eyes on the prize. But it certainly isn't a clear-cut situation on what the right thing to do is. And I'm sure I'd be interested to know about some athletes that may not have wanted to go and compete because they feel like Michaela Schifrin went on record saying she felt like she had to choose between standing up for human rights and doing her job, which was being an Olympian and being one of the greatest in the world. It's not a position I envy for these athletes.
And Amy, if one of these athletes came to you and asked for advice, right, how do you help them think through that question? And on top of the human rights concerns and everything else, there's also COVID and an incredible surveillance state in China that has been built up around COVID, including for these games. So what advice on a sort of human to human level would you give someone? Because at the end of the day, you're right. These are humans who are asked to confront big questions when just trying to do their job. So what advice would you give someone today?
I think that it has to be, it's an individual choice. I mean, I wish I remembered the name of the study, but there was a study done maybe 20 years ago with Olympians, not just American Olympians, but Olympians across the globe. And they were asked if they could take a pill that would end their life in 1 year, but it would guarantee a gold medal in their event, would they take it? And 95% of Olympians said yes. So just to get a little picture of the mindset of that level of dedication and desire for a certain outcome. It's not typical. There's nothing typical about that. So you take that extraordinary determination, focus, dedication, hard work, discipline, sacrifice, especially in these COVID protocols, what these athletes have endured. And, I understand why you don't see many Olympians saying, well, I'm going to sit this one out. But if someone came to me and said, I feel conflicted about this, I would talk through ways in which they can think about their role as advocates after the games. I mean, I think that, to your point, Marie, about the surveillance state, I know many of them are really being advised, do not take your laptop, do not take your phone, don't take anything that you bring back into this country. Those are the kinds of things that Olympians really don't ever think about. You're just trying to think about, you're dialing in on the minutia of your body and your mind and the psychology in these final days leading up to your events. So I think I would try and just talk through with them a place where they could feel good about the fact that they're one of the best at what they do in the geographic region where they grew up. And it's not even about just where they grew up. And we have Eileen Gu, who born and raised in San Francisco, champion free skier, and her mother's native born to China. Her father's American, and she decided to compete for China in these games. And I'm very, very interested to watch how she navigates that particular conundrum, because she does live and train in the United States and is an American by birth, but has embraced her Chinese heritage. And, it's like, again, this is where I think, is this an opportunity where there could be the promise of sport or the power of sport? I mean, we all can think about those iconic images of Jesse Owens in 1936, those games, obviously marked historically. His winning 4 gold medals embarrassed a white supremacist regime. So I'm curious, we know that athletes do have this, they can have this power and they do have this platform, but I think in this particular moment, a lot of them are going to honor the restrictions on speaking out.
Victor, I want to bring you in here. When Amy first told me that story about just her own personal sort of ethical dilemma about the 2008 Beijing Games, it really stuck with me. And we're back in Beijing. And in that time since, we've been to Sochi in Russia, we have encountered this over and over again. And you do so much work on looking at the power of sports and the diplomatic complications. So set the stage for us a little bit, picking up on what Amy said about the possibility, the promise of the Olympics, but when that meets the reality of being in a place like Beijing. What are you looking at as we start these games?
So thanks, Marie, for the question. I'm really happy to be able to share the stage with Aimee Mullins, who really is a superstar. And I really was very interested in hearing her speak about, from the athlete's perspective, how they look at these games. I mean, I think starting out on I want to start where she started, which is, sporting events like the Olympics and sports in general have great potential to bring people together, right? I mean, when you hear about India and Pakistan, like putting aside their feud to, play cricket, or, the United States and China opening relations with ping pong diplomacy. I mean, sport has a way of connecting. It's a universal language that has a way of connecting folks, despite all the differences they have. And that, of course, is the idea behind the whole notion behind the Olympics and the spirit of the Olympics. Having said that, I think there's not, it's difficult, as Amy said, when you have athletes wearing the colors of their nations, it's difficult for these things not to become political. And they become particularly political when you have countries like illiberal regimes like Russia and China that host these games, right? Because then a lot of these ethical dilemmas come up, right? Sports is really just about it's the quintessentially liberal thing in many ways, because of the focus on everybody plays by the same rules, nobody has an advantage, it's fair competition, meritocracy, best performance wins. I mean, and when that comes up against, surveillance of the Chinese state and, all these sorts of things, this is when we really sort of see politics and sports clashing. That's the first point. The second is, I thought it was really interesting what Amy said about how athletes feel more pressure because of the diplomatic boycott. I think that's really interesting because, I mean, not as an Olympic athlete, as sort of an academic that looks at this and a practitioner, my initial reaction to the boycott was, I understand what Biden is trying to do, but in a way he's actually depoliticizing the Olympics, because there will be no high-level US officials there that, will have meetings on the side and will say something about Xinjiang, we'll do a presser on the plane and say something about Hong Kong. And so I thought, on the one hand, I understand why, as Jen Psaki said, we don't want to contribute to the fanfare of the games. But at the same time, they were actually serving to depoliticize this by, removing that aspect, at least from the opening ceremony. But then, of course, as Amy said, then, the unintended consequence of that is it puts pressure on two groups, right? The corporate sponsors and the athletes. Corporate sponsors are not going to do anything, right? I mean, the reality is they're just not, the Chinese market is just too important. They're not going to do anything. But then it goes to the athletes. And I think I would end up where Amy did, which is, athletes are not there for politics. Athletes, in many ways, they're kind of, all the politics swirls around them, but they're there to perform, right? And to fulfill their dream. All their training, their life's training is for this moment. And, after that, if there is some political statement they wish to make, some may do that, some may not. That's a different story. But they should not be going into these games thinking that they have to take on a political agenda, of their country or of human rights groups or other sorts of things. I think when you become a dignitary, like Amy did when she was asked to go to the 2008 games, that's a different story. As a former Olympian, if you go, then the politics comes back into play again, big time, right? And listening to Amy, it sounded like it was in two ways, right? It had not only to do with Beijing, it also had to do with U.S. foreign policy at the time. So I think that, so I would kind of end up where she did. The case of this athlete Gu, who's competing for China, I have been asked about this as well. And I too find it quite fascinating because, one, I'm interested to see how the Chinese react to this person, right? My guess is that if she doesn't medal or she doesn't perform well, they'll see it as nice, but it won't create a lot of attention. But if she's successful, I think it would create a lot of attention and perhaps in a good way, because it would sort of raise notions of sort of citizenship and identity that are not very ethnocentric, and the fact that this person is both Chinese and American, given the state of U.S.-China relations right now, could potentially be a very, very positive thing. But as Marie, the other point I have on this is that a lot of the talk about the politics of the Olympics, at least in my view, observing this over time, is that it reaches a crescendo with the opening ceremony. And then once the opening ceremonies finish and the games begin, no matter, if you're an NGO, that no matter how much you want to push Xinjiang or Hong Kong, just the performance is too powerful, right? Mm-hmm. The performance of the athletes, just too powerful a story that people can't help but get sucked into to what the Olympics are, right? Which is all of these incredible athletes competing. And so for better or for worse, I think that's what's going to happen. The opening ceremony, I guess they're tomorrow, our time, they're tomorrow. For better or for worse, that's what's going to happen with these Winter Olympics, is as they did in 2008 with the Summer Olympics, which is there's a lot of talk about the politics of the games in advance. And then once the games happen, all we care about are, our athletes doing well and all the stories that come with that. And I can't say that I won't say that that's a bad thing, right? I mean, I think that's what's so magical about the Olympics. You don't get these sorts of pressures on professional athletes when they go and when they go, like when the NBA goes to play in China, or and these are professionals, right? Business people, they don't get that sort of pressure because they're not there like representing their country.
Studios, Hollywood studios.
Right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But these young, many of them teenagers, young athletes that go over there, that are, they're amateurs, right? They're not professionals, they're amateurs. They go over there. There's a lot of there's a lot of pressure that gets put on them that really shouldn't, but it often does.
Amy, I saw you nodding your head a couple of times when Victor was speaking. I do think that the diplomatic boycott does put more burden on the athletes, right? Because there is no government official sort of making that statement. But I saw you really nodding when Victor said the politics seem to kind of fade as the events actually start. Was that, from your perspective, having been there, does that feel that way to you?
Yes, that I think, but I also think that's the MO of these illiberal governments too, is they know that they have to weather a lot of brouhaha before it, but then they put on a great show. And it's true, it's almost Pavlovian, they play that Olympic fanfare, trumpets, and everybody just zones into, we're watching extraordinary feats done by human beings. And then you learn, we all learn about their backstories and the things that they've survived to get there. And those are the moments that make the Olympics as powerful as they are, Olympics and Paralympics. But it is also why, as I've been marinating on this the last few days, I realized that something does happen as you get older and that your post-competitive career as an athlete. A lot of athletes go into either media training, they become on-camera talent, or they go into the coaching world, and the Olympic, certainly the USOC and the governing bodies of the various sports underneath that umbrella has gone through extraordinary shakeups in the last decade. The sexual abuse allegations and just having the USOC have to look at, there's very little athlete input into what ends up happening to these athletes. The athletes have no say in the fact of who the IOC grants the host country to be. And I don't think that's a great thing. I think that the athletes should be more involved, because I think a lot of them do have opinions. They are far more media savvy than ever because of social media, and they understand branding, that's for sure. And you see that when a cause is compelling and it's accessible and they're allowed to speak on it, they do, as in the case of when I was named chef de mission in 2012, my counterpart was Peter Vidmar, who was on a gold medalist in the 84 men's gymnastics in LA. And, Peter, fantastic athlete, in his personal belief, didn't believe that same-sex marriage should be legalized, and campaigned actively, both with his checkbook and personally marching with signs. He campaigned to overturn Proposition 8 in California. And so when the announcement was made, I wasn't aware of his political activism, but I suddenly was on a plane. So when I got off the plane, my phone just blew up with all of these texts, and from athletes saying, I'm gay. I don't feel like this person can represent me. I don't feel like that his views are in alignment with the Olympic Charter, which specifically prohibits discrimination in all those ways. But it was very interesting to see how, ultimately Peter did stand down, even though he really believed he could do his job and represent every single athlete on Team USA equally. The athletes didn't feel that way. And so the movement came from within, where the athletes said, we're not having it. And the USOC had to, Peter stepped down. So it's not that this doesn't happen, and we don't see athletes rise to a political conversation or political discussion, but we're not in a country that's going to, any kind of sanctioning of an Olympic athlete isn't going to be as severe as what people could experience in a host country like China. You know, as I was talking to various, you know, athletes, there's rumors abound about what it's actually going to be like under these COVID restrictions, and the testing protocols, and the fact that your test results are in the hands of someone who may or may not want to play fair or sabotage. You know, it's a totally different level of a sense of things being fraught on so many levels. And I feel like for a lot of Olympians, it will be with time that these games or their experience there might manifest into something more vocal. Certainly that was the case for me. So I don't blame them. I know that a lot of human rights advocacy groups have been leaning hard on Olympians who were openly relieved when it was a diplomatic boycott, that they weren't going to do a full boycott as they did in the 1980 games, which they know now that the psychological damage to people training for years and years and years in their whole lives, and then they make this team, and it's, you know, they really are the top 1% of what they do, and then to not get to compete, you're basically being penalized for, at that point, Russia's foreign policy in Afghanistan, Soviet Union's foreign policy, which isn't fair.
Right.
So the athletes that were relieved, saying, "Oh, it was so good because we just all this sacrifice, we want to be able to compete for our dreams," and you have human rights groups saying, "Well, don't you think that 1 million Uyghurs being forced into encampments or forced sterilizations, these re-educations, these disappearances, just on that issue alone, do you think that's worth a little sacrifice?" These are the kinds of things that are happening, especially because so many of these athletes are on social media. They are directly, they can be engaged with, or even if they're not going to respond, they can't unsee the things that people are sending. So, as we've been seeing in the Olympics last summer and in other sporting events, many more athletes are speaking out about their mental health issues in a way that didn't used to get talked about, which I find so galvanizing and refreshing that these topics are being discussed, because it's already, like I said, a monumental thing to calibrate your mind and your body for a feat like this with these games. But to add which side, how are you going to skate various foreign policies, various media trainings, and outright threats of being sanctioned because it is prohibited by the IOC. So I think it's going to be interesting to see over time what some of these athletes, how any kind of political voice might manifest. But I don't think we're going to see it here.
Right. I think we're going to bring a student into the conversation. And while we get them on camera, we've talked a lot about sports and politics here in our country. I mean, think about the NFL and kneeling, think about Black Lives Matter and NBA players taking, and others taking really strong stands as well. So I think it's clear that these are complicated issues, but when you're not a professional, right, when you are an amateur, and particularly when you're even younger on the Olympic stage, I can't imagine the sort of internal personal dynamics at play here. I think we're going to get one of our students on video. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
My name is Sophie. I'm a second-year student in the Master of Science in Foreign Service program. I have a question for both of you. Do you think sports governing bodies like the IOC or FIFA have the responsibility to not put their athletes, journalists, workers at risk by awarding hosting bids to liberal and authoritarian governments? I know the IOC updated their host city contract that's supposed to go into effect in 2024 So do you think this is going to work? And if not, what would need to happen to incentivize the IOC or FIFA to make different choices with their hosts? Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'd love for both of you to answer that. And the FIFA mention is a good one too. We've seen this with the World Cup. We've talked about that a lot as well. Amy, do you want to start? And Victor, I'd love to get both of your thoughts on this.
My personal thinking on it is yes, the IOC should be more responsible about putting their athletes in and the support staff and everybody in a host country that has a liberal government. They've done it before. I mean, they banned, boycotts are not new. Boycotts actually been happening since 300 BC. Athens boycotted one of the original Olympic Games because of a bribery charge against one of the competitive athletes. This has been going on. South Africa was banned from competing in the Olympics in 1964 for decades because of their apartheid government. So, it hasn't been consistent. There's times when they do make these choices and times when they don't. And I have to believe that the leverage of, I know, yes, 1.4 billion consumers in the Chinese market, yes, but when you have the leverage that those major corporate sponsors could have, I think if there was a unified action, and certainly if these discussions would happen in a meaningful way when the IOC is entertaining the bids, I think some better choices would be made. And I think there's power to be leveraged there that they're not leveraging.
Victor, the IOC's famously come under criticism for a number of issues, a number of controversies. Where do you come down on this?
So I agree with Amy's bottom line. Let me offer a couple of thoughts. The first is that the awarding of the Olympics to host cities in the past has had positive impacts, right? So it has, when they've been awarded to countries that are sort of on the cusp of development, it has created sea changes in these places. And so I look at Asia, and I look at the 88 Olympics in Korea, the 64 Olympics in Tokyo, and they literally changed these countries all for the better, right? All for the better. And so when I left the US government, and then I decided to write this book because I didn't want to write about North Korea because I was so sick of dealing with North Korea in terms of nuclear negotiations. I said, I got to write about something else. I basically tried to write this theory that said, having the Olympics in Beijing could be the ultimate potential liberalizing experience for China, right? Because the whole world will come there. They don't only have to upgrade infrastructure and everything, they have to upgrade politically the way they think and act and everything. And, much to my disappointment, that was not the case, right? That did not happen in China. And so, so this is my point. I do agree with Amy that now then the responsibility falls on the IOC. They still, pull out the same old talking points that they pulled out before Beijing and before they had the Olympics in South Korea in 1980, which at the time when they were awarded in 1981, South Korea was a military dictatorship, right? So by the time they hosted the Olympics, they were a democracy. But those talking points have to be updated, right? It's not necessarily the case that the Olympics will be a politically liberalizing experience for these countries, as we've seen in China and in Russia. The host city contract that Sophie was referring to, I think, is, I think it's I mean, I don't want to sound cynical, but it's kind of a fig leaf. It's sort of like checking the box. But when you compare, for example, the way the IOC and the Women's Tennis Association, the WTA, have dealt with this case of this missing. She was a former Olympian too, right? Missing.
Yeah, three-time medalist.
Right, 3-time S, right? So she and the,
Yeah, Peng Shuai.
right. The WTA basically, as suggested, said, okay, we're canceling all the tournaments. Usually after, usually at the last major Grand Slam in professional tennis is the U.S. Open, and then usually you go into the winter, and the winter circuit, at least for the women, there's a big winter circuit through Asia with a number of tournaments in China, right? In Hong Kong, right? 13, right?
Tournaments, yeah.
Yeah, and the WTA president, I can't remember his name, but he made the decision basically to cancel all those tournaments for exactly those reasons. They don't want to put their players, their staff, or anybody else in a position of danger until this is resolved. The IOC response was to hold these 2 video calls with her where she said, yeah, I'm fine, everything's okay, don't worry about me. And so they've just dealt with it in very different ways. And sure, there could be other backstories behind this, and Thomas Bach said they're dealing with it quietly and things, but even if that's the case, the optics are terrible, right? The optics are absolutely terrible.
So for our students on the webinar, don't forget to put questions in the Q&A, and you'll be come on video and be able to ask questions of Amy and Victor. I mean, just to your point, I in another part of my house have the framed poster that I actually got at IOC headquarters from Sarajevo from the '84 Olympics. And I have it framed as a reminder that the world can change pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that stuck with me. But I love, Victor, the idea, and I don't love the idea that you had to, but it's so interesting that you had to revisit that thesis that maybe this international competition wouldn't change people, right? That recognition on the international stage wouldn't change people. Amy, I wonder, there are a lot of people who say that viewers should boycott, or that we shouldn't support these Olympics because we don't want China to have big viewership numbers or something like that. I think people will still watch, but what would you say to sort of average Americans trying to think about how to think about these games, right? From an athlete's perspective.
I think support the athletes if you want to. Yeah, I think support the athletes. We already made the decision. They're going, they went, they're there.
Right.
And like I said, it's in so many ways unenviable games to be at, and the burden on them, I think, is greater than what most other Olympians have faced in recent years. For again, many reasons. I think it's really important, and I hope that the media in this country around the Olympics can have conversations about what's going on in the South China Sea and Tibet and Taiwan and Mongolia and ask people, look at we vote in a capitalist society, we vote with our wallets. So to Victor talking about what the WTA had the courage of their convictions to do, it cost them hundreds of millions. And when the CCP sanctioned the Houston Rockets, that cost them hundreds of millions in merchandise not being sold and games broadcast in China. And it's whether or not you decide that that's what it's going to be. And that's what I mean about this power that hasn't been leveraged from these 13 major corporate sponsors, is everybody's terrified to anger that lose that market of consumers. But I think, those are the tough things that I think have to actually happen. So I think look at what you buy. Look at where it's made, ask where it's made. I mean, I've been seeing a lot more of that. I find that when I've been noticing that people are equating, look at where you're putting your money, where are you sending your money to? And certainly the supply chain issues that everyone's felt in the last year and a half, people understand how interconnected we all are, and realize that this, just because you want something delivered to your house tomorrow, maybe it isn't the best choice for the economic health of your community or your state or your country.
Victor, could you say a little?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I said
No,
go around for a tangent.
Well, but I think Victor, could you say a little bit about that? Because it wasn't really a tangent, right? Because I think some Americans say they want to do something, right? The issues that they care about that make them uncomfortable with the Olympics being in China, they want to do something, right? I don't know, Victor, could you sort of speak on that?
Yeah, so it is a personal choice, but if the idea is I'm going to have my protest of the Olympics by not watching the games, I mean, that's a personal choice. But again, this goes back to what we said earlier about don't blame the athletes, right? We shouldn't be boycotting US athletes because China is, doing all sorts of human rights abuses in Xinjiang, right? They should not be the ones who feel the blame because of that. So I would say just at this point, just go and support the athletes, watch the games, and hope that they win. I mean, I think that the other piece of this, which we haven't talked about, is the Olympics doesn't happen in a vacuum. And as you know, Marie, I mean, the main story on today in foreign policy is what's happening on the border between Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
And if there is something that happens there, that could take all the attention away from the political aspects of the Olympics, and focus it all on Russia. As you know, well, the hard news cycle will move entirely to Russia. And then the soft news will just be the athletes, U.S. athletes performing well. And again, that's something that personally, I think that works to China's benefit because, and that, if you remember in 2008 in the Beijing Summer Games, that's what happened then too, because
Georgia.
Right. Russia. Yeah, there was that war with Georgia. So,
and that was opening. That was the day of opening ceremonies.
Right. Yeah, the day, it was almost like it was coordinated, right?
Yeah. Well, you got a personal invitation from Xi Jinping. Was
right, right.
So he's going. Right. He will be there at opening ceremonies.
Right. So he'll be there. So that would be kind of awkward to be invading Ukraine while you're at these opening ceremonies. But yeah, they don't happen in a vacuum. With regard to the corporate sponsors and sort of the money behind the Olympics, I mean, part of the reason that the IOC, as Amy knows well, the IOC has always been interested in bringing both the summer and the winter games to China, right? And particularly the winter games, because they want to bring winter sports to the largest middle class market for the next 2 generations, right? And so they could have done it in Austria again, and it would have been great, but you're not expanding the market by doing that. And so, they're operating according to the laws of economics. And, I don't know what you can do about that. I mean, corporate sponsorship is a different thing now because I think it's a different potential area of focus just because corporations are trying to be more socially responsible these days. But for some reason, that does not, as we talked about with Hollywood or anybody, for some reason that doesn't apply to China. And I don't understand why that's the case, right? It's sort of like, well, that's just the way the Chinese do business. But I think in many ways that's not really an acceptable counter argument anymore.
Well, I know that they've been asking. There is a murmur to try and get the NOCs, the National Olympic Committees, to urge that the IOC aligns its charter with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It's currently not, but that's one problem. It's the fact that that's why they can get away with this, like, oh, it's just how they do business. It makes me think of when certain books were being burned in northern England. So the one book, it was Satanic Verses, and it was, a mayor of a northern English town was like, well, my constituents are Muslim and they're angered by this book and they want to burn it. And it's like, well, there is something in a culture about there is something as universal human rights. There is such a thing.
Do you think the money is just too big? And I mean, the market, so I think we've seen corporations become more socially active, as you've said. And look, NBC isn't doing their full media coverage of this. They're not covering the opening ceremonies there on the ground. Savannah Guthrie, I think, is doing it from New York. Part of that is COVID and surveillance. I think there's more than just a social responsibility aspect of it. But I do think these media organizations couldn't come up with a way to cover all of these issues, the human rights issues, all of this, and operate in China and cover the games. I have a feeling that was part of what was behind their decision. I could be wrong about that, but they can't just do feel good stories about whatever small town they're hosting whatever event in. They would have to do something else, and I just think they couldn't figure out how to. I don't know if you all would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that's certainly that's certainly part of it. Part of it is also the experience of 2008, right? And having done this once already in China.
And what was that like? Sorry to interrupt, Victor, but when you say the experience of 2008, what would that have been like?
Well, I think it's in general, it's the same thing, which is when the media covers the event, they'll write stories about the athletes, but then they'll also try to write these other stories about whether it's women's rights or Xinjiang or Hong Kong, and Olympic hosts, whether it's China or any other country, they're hypersensitive, they're neurologic about these sorts of things because they spent the last 8 years preparing to host the world, and they want this to run perfectly. That, I would say, that's the case not just for China, but that would be the case for Tokyo or any place else that's hosting it. But it's especially the case with China because they're telling a story not just to the world, but they're telling a story to their domestic constituency about the continued viability and success of the Chinese model and the Chinese state, and why. And the unwritten narrative is, the sacrifice of some civil liberties provides all this to you, right? The picture perfect Olympic Games. So part of it could be due to COVID as well. I think that's certainly part of it. But the thing I think about listening, over this conversation, the thing that sticks with me the most is the very first thing that Amy said from the perspective of an athlete, when you're focusing on, like she said, the minutia of your body and your mind, but then to have to deal with all of these COVID restrictions on top of that must just be, and the notion that how do you know the testing regime is legitimate, right? How do you know that it's actually legitimate if you're like a athlete vying for a gold medal and your competition is are these other athletes who could be from the host? How do you know? Like, how do you know that that's legitimate? And
well, especially when Russia had an absolutely state-sponsored doping program for so long that they just have to deny and deny and deny, and it's until it's finally exposed that there's some, even the punitive action was their being banned was reduced from 4 years to 2. It's not very galvanizing. The other thing I would love to point out that seems like it's unrelated, but I don't think it is that the United States is one of the only countries in the world, it might be the only country, that does not subsidize its Olympians. So most Olympians work and live at the poverty level. Like, we're talking about the ones that and you've heard of get on a Wheaties box and they get endorsement deals because they medaled. But the joke, not joke, amongst Olympians and Paralympians was that silver was loser gold because you don't get those endorsement deals. And so when you look at these corporate sponsors, I remember with Home Depot, a lot of Olympians actually work there because the Olympic sponsor will give them a flexible hours so they can train at the hours they need to train, and they can still get a shift. But for a lot of, people don't realize that with the wealth we have in this country, we don't give our Olympians any money. They have to come up with all their own money for training and and that's why they have to see themselves as brands very young and very early and get corporate sponsorships, even from the Radio Shack in Northern Virginia, was helping me out when I was competing. You take any little bit where you can get it, but that absolutely plays into it too, because they're going there with all this hope for the best performance they can get, but it does, besides the idealistic aspect of that, there's a very real monetary goal that follows that, which is that they have to, this is how they end up trying to make a living going forward, and this is their shot. And yeah, it's very few of them that would want to jeopardize that.
The one other thing I'd add is maybe Amy, but I've talked to some Team USA athletes that were at the Tokyo Games, when there were COVID restrictions. And in general, they felt, they were quite appreciative of the efforts that the host country made to facilitate their ability to compete despite the dangers of COVID. And I wonder if that's going to be the case coming out of these games in Beijing, if they will actually see, the Chinese host as being helpful to them, or actually being an obstacle to them, to their having good performances. I could be wrong, but that was because the restrictions were quite severe in Tokyo, right, over the summer. But the sense I got from athletes, and maybe it was just because it was after the games were over, that they were quite appreciative of the chance to compete, and that the host. And I just am not sure that with China's so-called zero COVID policy, I just don't know if that's going to be the case this time.
Yeah, and also, there's false positives. They know that there's so much that can be, manipulated, and you have no recourse as an athlete. Your recourse is you go to the chef de mission who files a complaint, and the delegation files a complaint. But at the end of the day, you're sitting in your room in the Olympic Village, and you can't leave it. So it's yeah.
And we've already seen some athletes and coaches who've landed test positive and have to start quarantining there. So, the way the schedule is, right? Sometimes it's the luck of the draw if your event is earlier or later. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to give each of you a chance to give some final remarks about what you're looking for and what you're looking forward to over these next few weeks. We've talked about a lot of the complications, and there are many. But Amy, you've been there, you've been on this world stage, and I don't want to just end on a hopeful note to end on a hopeful note for itself, but I'd love to hear sort of what you're thinking about as we head into these games, and what our students should be looking for.
Wow.
What your favorite Winter Olympics event is. You can even end with that.
Ski jump. Every time I see the ski jump, I think I want to do that so badly. And then I picture that moment where you're cresting in the air, and then it's just on the way down. And I actually considered going for the US team for skeleton. Right. This would have been 98. Because basically the main thing they approached me because the main thing you really need to be is a sprinter. You need the leg power, and then get in there. And it was like, I just remember the kid, they were trying to recruit me. He's like, just imagine you're going down with your nose an inch and a half away from the ice at 70 miles an hour. And I was like, that sounds great. But again, that's what I'm saying. The mentality is not, about health and safety. It's about, nuts. So I particularly, the summer games are always super emotional for me, because I always feel like I should be training and competing. The winter games have always been a joy and a release for me, because I don't do any of those sports, and I can genuinely be a spectator and watch, and
why didn't you do the skeleton? Why did Why didn't you do it?
I felt like my time at that level of training and competition to sustain that, especially, when I tell you about the majority of Olympic athletes that are working and living literally at the poverty level, try that for a Paralympian. They just created equal pay for medals in 2019 between Olympics and Paralympics. So there wasn't anyone. I mean, I was 10 years before my time in the sense of shoe contracts and endorsement deals and stuff like that. It just was very, very different. And so I had to, the idea that I could look at the next however many years. I had the luxury of training as a student at Georgetown. So my housing was covered. I was in a nice safety net at Georgetown. Whereas doing that outside of being a student and it just felt not worth it to me. I needed to move on in my life. I still get up to some adventures.
I have no doubt about that, believe me. And we have to have you back on campus, when we can, as COVID gets a little better, to have you tell all of our students about those in person. I know they would love to hear that. Victor, what are you going to be watching these next few weeks?
So I like bobsled, right? I think that's really cool. That's a great story about the skeleton. I'd not heard that before. That would have been amazing. That would have been amazing. I mean,
regrets.
I mean, when the politics of the Olympics are the politics of the Olympics, but really once the games start, I can't think of a bigger stage for like individual athletic performance, right, in the world. There's no bigger stage. I mean, team sports, but this is like really truly individual performance. And in that sense, I think the Olympic spirit still lives, right? Because when you see the athletes, and now I have an even finer appreciation of the hardships that they go through, listening to Amy about what they go through to get to that point. You really want for all them to worry about is their performance, and not to have to worry about the politics, and not have to worry about COVID tests and all these sorts of things. So you really have to be pulling for them. And that would be the message that I would leave with.
I wish I could talk to both of you all day, and I'm sure our students agree. The last thing I will close with is the opening ceremonies will air on Friday evening. And apparently I've been told that SFS Twitter, for alums who've taken the Map in the Modern World class, as I know Amy has, like explodes during the opening ceremonies because they're all talking about the different countries and the flags. And so I am looking forward to that on Friday evening. Amy, any last words of wisdom before we end the conversation?
Well, just to be grateful, as I still am, for having had those classes in philosophy and ethics. That the State Department, I think, issued a statement last year about that the decline in civics education in the US was becoming a national security threat because people aren't training their brains to recognize disinformation campaigns and to be able to think for themselves and understand that there is such a thing as ethical concerns and ethical responsibility. So I personally have always been really proud as a Georgetown alum that that's something that no matter what your major, we all go through that, and hopefully I think it does shape you in those formative years to continue thinking about these societal issues in a meaningful way, and hopefully with some action behind it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to Victor Chan, Aimee Mullins. We are very grateful for both of you to spend so much time. Thank you to folks watching on the webinar or on Facebook Live. The video will live there, so you can go back and watch it later. Tell your friends to do the same. And everybody enjoy watching the athletes compete in these next few weeks. I think the Olympics, as Victor said, are just there's nothing like them. They're really quite special. While of course thinking about all of these issues as well. So thank you to everyone for joining, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening.